Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests. I first became interested in parliamentary law when I was 15 years old. I had been elected student body vice president at Washington Irving Junior High School in Los Angeles, and all of the elected officers of the school were required to take a leadership class. And the leadership class was an entire semester that met every day in the place of an English course. The entire class was run using parliamentary procedures. The teacher, Miss Kristowski, served as the parliamentarian as she sat at her desk, and the student body president ran the meeting. Our assignment for that semester was to revise the school constitution. It was a fun time, and it was the activity that caught my interest in parliamentary law and parliamentary procedure. Well, I'll use those terms interchangeably. So it is quite interesting to me to know that there are people who think that parliamentary law is what complicates meetings. They're wrong. It is not what complicates meetings. It is the lack of knowledge of parliamentary law and what it's intended to accomplish that complicates meetings. You see, most people, what they know about parliamentary procedure is what they saw someone else do. And the problem is they saw it done wrong. And everybody starts repeating this wrong thing, and it gets wronger and wronger. I hope the word master is catching that word. And then it gets more complicated and more complicated. And they throw up their hands and they say, I don't want to do parliamentary procedure. It just makes the meeting wrong and sluggish. In fact, if you do what Robert wanted you to do when he created the rules, your meetings will move faster and smoother. And the key thing is on making motions. Now, there are four basic principles that you have to keep in mind. For an organization, the four basic principles are these: the majority rules, the minority must be heard, one action is considered at a time, and no action gets a second look in the same session. Of course, except in special situations, which I'm not going to cover today. But if you keep these four basic principles in mind, and then you think, okay, does this rule, does this procedure, as I understand it, protect those principles? Those principles must always be protected. And then if you consider your meeting to be in four moving parts, here are the four moving parts. First, the meeting itself. Second, the chair. Third, the members. And fourth, the business. So the key thing is for these things to stay in motion. So the meeting, when you meet, where you meet, how you meet, that is not determined by parliamentary procedures. It is once you have your meeting that parliamentary procedures kick in. And of course, an organization can write its own rules. They don't have to follow Robert's rules of order. They can write their own rules, but why reinvent the wheel when it was done for you by Henry M. Robert, approximately 150 years ago? So the meeting place and time and date, that's not set by the rules, but once you're in the meeting, members are gathered, the meeting recess or the meeting adjournment are set by the rules. So those parliamentary rules help to keep that meeting on track and in its recess or adjournment. The second moving part being the chair, whose responsibilities are to keep things in order, keep the authority going. I shouldn't say keep the authority going, but maintaining the order within the meeting. So they maintain the order of the agenda, the order of the members when they get to speak, and the order of the motion. They also are responsible for making rulings, but there are procedures for what to do if you disagree with the ruling. So the chair is not a dictator, but a facilitator. The third moving part are the members. And here's what must happen for this part to keep moving properly. The member has a right to be informed. The member has the right to propose action. The member has the right to speak. The member has a right to vote. All of those rights must be protected by the rules and by the chair who conducts the meeting. And then the fourth moving part is the business itself. Now, the business that comes before an organization could be in the form of reports to be filed. Now, those reports to be filed, they're given by the committee or person that's required to give the report, and you file that report. There are some reports to be acted upon. There are actions that can be taken unanimously with unanimous consent. And there are actions that will require motion and vote. So those are the moving parts, but who's responsible for keeping those parts in motion? That's the chair. The chair must be certain that the members' rights are protected, as I indicated, and that the business is moving. So the chair must be knowledgeable about the steps to handle a motion, the characteristics of each motion, and once we have a motion on the floor, how do we dispose of it? And by the way, Mr. Timer is going to have to give me some audible signal when I'm reach the green light. I forgot to mention that. So what are those steps for a motion? This is what the chair must know. Members should know this too, because then you'll know how to behave yourself once you're in the meeting. But in handling a motion, there are 6 steps. 1, a member is recognized and then makes the motion. Now, when that member makes the motion, that motion is still the possession of the member. It requires a second, however. The person who seconds the motion doesn't have to be recognized. Here's where they have the chance to blurt out, "Second." And once the motion is second, well, let's talk first why we should second the motion. The motion is seconded because we want to be certain that we take our time in this meeting to cover issues that at least 2 people are interested in covering. In other words, we don't cover in the meeting issues that only one person is interested in covering. So the second is for the indication that there are at least 2 people. That person who seconds is not saying, "I agree with the motion, I'm going to vote for it." They're simply saying, "I agree that we should take that action up." The third action, or the third step to handling a motion, is for the chair to restate the motion. Now, once this chair restates the motion, it is no longer the possession of the maker. It becomes the possession of the body, and it can only be disposed of by the body. Fourth step is for discussion or debate, depending on the word you want to use. Fifth step is to vote. Sixth step is to announce the results. The chair must follow those 6 steps. Now, there's some motions in which certain of those steps may be eliminated and the chair has to be aware of it, but basically those are the 6 things to keep in mind in handling an action that is taken. Now, I'm going to go back to talk about when the motion is made, because the language is, I move that. I'm sure you've been in meetings in which you've heard something other than I move that. You hear people say motion. I've heard at our local school board meeting, the chair will say, the chair entertains a motion for the adoption of item number 4A on the agenda, and someone in the meeting shouts motion, and then they proceed with the action. I suppose they could adopt that as their way of making motions, but in following parliamentary procedures as set by Robert's Rules of Orders, that is so wrong. I move that is the language that you should adopt. Not I motion that, I make a motion, but simply I move that. Now, once the motion is on the floor, there are ways, remember, it's the possession of the body. There are ways to dispose of the motion, and parliamentary rules give you 7 tools for disposing of a motion once it's on the floor. And there's a special order, because one motion could be pending and someone makes another motion. And then you have the question of, okay, which one do I handle first? What takes precedence? So the 7 motions that can be used to dispose of the main motion are the motion to postpone indefinitely, the motion to amend, the motion to refer to committee, the motion to postpone definitely, the motion to limit or extend limits of debate, the motion for the previous question, as our member Penelope Bohm talked about, and the motion to lay on the table. The motion to lay on the table is the most powerful one in terms of precedent. So no matter what may be pending, if someone moves to lay on the table, that is the one that should be considered immediately and disposed of. And all of those motions in the order in which I gave them, that is the order of their precedence. The chair must know that in order to know which motion should I deal with, which one do I handle first. Now, in addition to knowing how to handle the motion, the steps, and what are the subsidiary motions that we can use as tools, the chair needs to know what are the characteristics of a motion. Given any motion, what are its 8 characteristics? One, the first characteristic is every motion has its precedence. There is a rule about, do you take it up now or you set it aside and take up the motion that came after it? There's also applicability. Where do we apply this motion? There's order, I call it the order, and that is, does a member have to have the floor to make the motion? Second, does the motion require a second? There's some motions that would not require a second. Third, is it debatable? There's some motions that are not debatable. For example, a motion that relates to debate is not debatable. Is it amendable? And what type of vote is required? You have majority, but you also have 2/3 vote. And in some bodies, for example, there might be 60% vote. And finally, reconsidered. Can it be reconsidered? That also is knowledge that the chair should have. Now, if the chair has the knowledge that I just indicated, the 6 steps on how to handle the motion, the 7 tools on how to dispose of a motion, and the 8 characteristics of a motion, the chair can ensure that your meeting moves along. Staying in motion is most important. And if the chair keeps the the meeting moving along, that means the members' rights are protected and the business moves along and you can get accomplished what you planned for your meeting. And what's the time now? And I don't know, are we taking questions?
You're still good for time.
You want to give him the exact time, Sandra, so he has a clue?
Unfortunately, I can't because I set it originally for 18 minutes in the agenda. So I can do some math.
Okay, so Dana, if you have questions for Dana, either unmute yourself and sing out or raise your hand and I will call on you on his behalf. And otherwise, Dana, I guess you can simply continue. I'll interrupt you if I see paws being waved frantically in the air.
I'm sorry. This is Mrs. Bates. I do have a question for Dana, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I understood all of the steps for the motions, how to adopt the motion, and the characteristics. My question is number 8 of the characteristic of a motion where you reconsider it. Can the chair do that without prejudice?
I'm not quite sure what you mean, can the chair do it without prejudice?
Like you said, they're going to reconsider it. So will they be able to bring it back at a different time? And, nobody says, well, they brought that up already. And, we already have feelings about that, so without prejudice, would you be able to,
No, there's a special motion for reconsider. So if a motion is to be reconsidered in a meeting, remember one of the principles is an action is considered only once in the meeting. Yeah. So under reconsideration, there has to be a motion and there's special rules. We get too deep into the details, but there are special rules for reconsidering. It shouldn't just be the chair says, hey, let's take this up again. I want us to think about this again. That's not proper.
Okay, thank you very much.
Dana, the question was asked by Barbara. What is your favorite motion?
My favorite motion, I actually, if I were the chair conducting a meeting, I would think the motion to amend would be my favorite because that really tests the skill of a chair. When you get an amendment and then an amendment to the amendment, and if you get a tertiary amendment to know that it's out of order, and you could just go on and on with amendments, but the chair who can skillfully handle those really showed his or her knowledge of parliamentary law, and so I would call that my favorite.
I'm not seeing any other hands. If you're waving your hand and I'm not seeing you, come off mute and ask your question. Alicia, you have a question?
I do. Thank you very much. My question is, could you talk a little bit about motions to rescind, the why and how they're done?
I can't talk about that, and I'll tell you that I didn't plan for getting into depth in specific motions, knowing that this was going to be like an open house for the virtual parliamentarians and we might have some relatively new people. I prepared just a basic overall presentation to make sure that your meeting moves along.
Alicia, I'd invite you to come on a third Saturday of the month to one of the study groups as well, when we can ask one of the registered parliamentarians to answer that question. I see Ted is waving his hands there, but I'm not sure that we want to take the time right now to answer that specific question, but we do have an opportunity for those specific questions.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I see no more questions. Dana, did you have anything further in your presentation, or?
I am just going to close by saying that I prepared this basic presentation about how you keep a meeting in motion, because last summer I was asked to be the parliamentarian for a large group. It was a union of 9,000 members, but its executive board had 45 members. They scheduled for themselves monthly meetings that were scheduled for 5 hours. And the first meeting I sat in this 5 hours, they accomplished nothing more than setting the agenda. They asked me to help them move along. And I said, the key thing for moving along is work by motions. Everything should be about the motion. Don't have a discussion without someone making a motion. Once the motion is made, all kinds of rules kick in about how to dispose of it and how much time to give to debate and so forth. Everything should be by motion. I did get them to the point by the time I finished with them for the summer that they were getting through 3/4 of their agenda by the time they finished their 5-hour meeting. If you keep things in motion, that is to say, make sure that the actions are taken by making motions, you can keep your meeting moving along, fellow Toastmasters and guests.